What if the deepest hunger wasn't for food, but for something far more terrifying? Sarah was just 5 years old when a monster moved into her home, not under her bed, but inside her. A monster that demanded to be fed, always. Every meal became a battle. Every lock, a desperate attempt to contain the insatiable. Her family, held captive by an appetite that knew no bounds. This isn't just about hunger. This is about two souls fighting for one body. About the crushing weight of secrets, and how a family's love transformed into a desperate fight for survival. This is her truth, the terrifying, heartbreaking reality of a hunger that never dies.
I remember being 5 years old at my birthday party, still sitting at the table long after all the other kids had run off to play. I was the only one left, methodically eating slice after slice of cake while my family watched in growing horror. That was the moment they knew something was wrong. Doctors later named my monster Prader-Willi Syndrome, a condition where the brain's stop-eating signal is missing. I'm Sarah, and that birthday party was just the beginning of a lifetime battle with an appetite that never, ever stops. What started as innocent cake eating became a source of terror that would consume my entire family. This is my story of living with Prader-Willi Syndrome, where hunger becomes the monster under your bed. If you think unstoppable hunger sounds horrifying, you're about to see how it controls every second of my day. Most kids throw tantrums over toys or bedtime, but my meltdowns were different, primal, terrifying even to me. The sound that came out of my mouth when someone tried to stop me from eating was something deeper, more desperate, like a wounded animal fighting for survival. My parents would find me in the kitchen at 2 a.m, tears streaming down my face as I shoved handfuls of cereal into my mouth, not because I was sad, but because something inside me was screaming that I needed more, always more. After that birthday party, the hunger didn't just continue, it evolved into something that felt alive inside me, growing stronger every day. I could feel it moving through my body like a second heartbeat, pulsing with its own rhythm that had nothing to do with whether I'd just eaten or not. What I didn't know then was that my hypothalamus, the part of the brain that signals when you're full, simply wasn't working. Other kids would get full and push their plates away, but I'd sit there watching them with confusion and envy, wondering what that feeling was like. The sensation of being satisfied was as foreign to me as speaking another language. My stomach would be physically stretched and uncomfortable, but my brain would still be calculating how to get more food, scanning the room for forgotten snacks or unattended plates. While other families worried about picky eaters, mine faced the opposite nightmare, a child who would eat anything, everything, without ever feeling satisfied. I ate things that shouldn't be edible, raw pasta, spoonfuls of flour, butter by itself. The taste didn't matter, the texture didn't matter. If it could go in my mouth, I wanted it. My parents started finding empty containers hidden under my bed, sticky wrappers stuffed behind furniture, evidence of a crime I couldn't remember committing. They'd ask me about it, and I'd lie automatically, not because I wanted to deceive them, but because the part of me that ate those things felt separate from the part of me that was talking to them. The earliest memories blur together, sneaking into the kitchen at 3 a.m, my tiny hands reaching for anything edible. Driven by a force I couldn't name or control, I learned to move silently across our hardwood floors, avoiding the spots that creaked, developing the stealth skills of a seasoned burglar before I could tie my own shoes. The refrigerator light would cast long shadows as I grabbed whatever I could reach, leftover Chinese food, condiments, raw vegetables, lunch meat. I'd eat standing there in the cold glow, stuffing food into my mouth with mechanical precision, my mind blank except for the urgent need to consume. When footsteps approached, I'd freeze like a deer in headlights, food still in my hands, caught between hunger and shame. I remember the look in my parents' eyes shifting from concern to fear as they realized this wasn't a phase. This was something medical, something permanent. The concerned smiles became worried glances. The gentle redirections became firm restrictions. I watched my dad install the first lock on our pantry door, his hands shaking slightly as he explained that it was to help me stay healthy. My mom started crying when she thought I wasn't looking, these quiet tears that she'd wipe away quickly when I entered the room. They stopped talking about normal kid things like soccer practice and piano lessons and started having hushed conversations about calories and portion control and doctor appointments. The pediatrician visits became a parade of confusion, with doctors initially dismissing our concerns until they witnessed my behavior firsthand. Dr. Miller told my parents I was just going through a growth spurt, that some children had bigger appetites than others, but then he saw me eat an entire sleeve of crackers during one appointment, methodically crunching through each one while he talked, and his expression changed. The nurses started weighing me more frequently, their cheerful small talk replaced by careful questions about my eating habits. My mother would later tell me she knew something was deeply wrong when I ate an entire loaf of bread in one sitting and immediately asked for more. She found me in the kitchen that morning, surrounded by crumbs, the empty plastic bag crumpled on the counter. I wasn't crying or upset. I was calm, systematic, already opening the refrigerator to see what else I could eat. When she asked if I was still hungry, I nodded without hesitation, genuinely confused by her shocked expression. The diagnosis of Prader-Willi Syndrome finally gave a name to my monster, but naming it didn't make it any less terrifying. If anything, learning that this hunger would never go away, that there was no cure or quick fix, made it worse. I was 7 years old, and I was learning that my relationship with food would define every aspect of my existence. And then came the lock that changed everything. If you think your parents are strict, imagine living in a house where every cabinet has a lock and every meal is measured to the gram. Picture coming home from school to find that your own mother has installed a padlock on the refrigerator, and suddenly the kitchen that used to smell like cookies and comfort now feels like a maximum security facility. That's the reality I woke up to one Tuesday morning when I was 8 years old. The metallic click of that lock turning became the soundtrack of my childhood, a constant reminder that I couldn't be trusted with the most basic human need. The day my family installed locks on the refrigerator was the day our house stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a medical facility. I remember watching my dad drill holes into our beautiful white cabinets, his face twisted with pain as he essentially turned our kitchen into a fortress. My siblings stood in the doorway, watching the installation like they were witnessing a funeral, which, in a way, they were. We were burying the last remnants of normal family life. These weren't just precautions, they were desperate measures born from incidents that terrified my parents and left me feeling like a criminal in my own kitchen. The breaking point came when they found me at 4 a.m, halfway through eating raw ground beef straight from the package, blood-red juices staining my nightgown and hands. I had picked the previous lock they'd installed, using a bobby pin I'd stolen from my sister's room. The look of pure horror on my mother's face when she flicked on that kitchen light still haunts me. She didn't scream or yell, she just stood there staring at me like I was some kind of wild animal that had somehow gotten into her house. That night, she called the locksmith first thing in the morning. I watched my siblings eat freely while I sat with my pre-portioned plate, every bite calculated and controlled by people who loved me but feared what I might do. Dinner became a performance where everyone pretended not to notice that I was the only one who couldn't reach for seconds or grab a roll from the basket. My brother would casually sneak extra pieces of chicken onto his plate while my parents weren't looking, a normal childhood rebellion that I could never attempt. I'd count every French fry on my plate, knowing that was all I'd get, no matter how hungry I felt afterward. The worst part wasn't the restriction itself, it was watching my family walk freely through a space where I had to ask permission for everything. The locks multiplied over time like a virus spreading through our house. Refrigerator, pantry, even my grandmother's purse had to be hidden when she visited because I'd learned to search for hidden snacks with the determination of a detective. I became incredibly resourceful, discovering that most people keep emergency candy in their bedside tables and that neighbors rarely lock their garbage cans. When we had dinner guests, my parents would brief them beforehand like they were entering a war zone, explaining which areas were off limits and warning them never to leave food unattended. I'd watch from the living room as my mom gave these security briefings, feeling like a dangerous animal that might attack at any moment. Family dinners became military operations, with my parents taking shifts to monitor my eating, their conversations peppered with coded language about portions and restrictions. They developed an entire vocabulary around my condition, speaking in hushed abbreviations and meaningful glances that excluded me from discussions about my own life. She had her P&V already, my mom would whisper to my dad, referring to my protein and vegetables. Better check the L situation meant someone needed to verify that lunch containers were properly secured. I learned to decode their secret language, understanding that every meal was a calculated risk assessment where I was both the patient and the threat. I could see the exhaustion in their eyes, the way they jumped at every sound from the kitchen, always wondering if I'd found a way around their safeguards. My father developed this nervous habit of checking locks multiple times before bed, rattling each handle like he was testing prison bars, while my mother started sleeping lighter, waking up at the smallest noise to make sure I wasn't attempting another midnight raid. They aged years and months, their faces carrying the constant stress of knowing that letting their guard down for even a moment could result in a medical emergency. My parents later said they felt like prisoners in their own kitchen, and the truth is, they became captives in their own home just as much as I did. The guilt was crushing, knowing that my condition had turned my loving parents into prison guards who never got a break from their duties. I watched my mother miss book club meetings because she couldn't trust me alone with a babysitter for 3 hours. My father stopped going on business trips, terrified of what might happen if I had a food crisis while he was gone. They never complained, never made me feel like a burden, but I could see the weight of constant vigilance wearing them down. Every family vacation required extensive planning around my dietary needs. Every social gathering became a logistical nightmare. Every simple pleasure in their lives filtered through the lens of my condition. Every locked door was a reminder that I couldn't be trusted with the most basic human need, that my own hunger made me dangerous to myself. The clicking sound of those locks became the rhythm of my daily life, marking the boundaries of a world that kept shrinking around me. Those locks saved my life, but fenced me in more tightly than any horror prison. And soon I'd discover that even the strongest barriers couldn't contain what was growing inside me when I stepped outside our controlled home. School was supposed to be my escape from the food restrictions at home, but it became the place where my hidden monster finally showed its face to the world. I thought I could hide my condition behind a normal lunchbox and force smiles, pretending to be just another second grader excited about recess and spelling tests. For the first few weeks, I managed to keep up the act, eating my carefully portioned lunch while eyeing everyone else's snacks like a hunter studying prey. But Prader-Willi Syndrome doesn't stay hidden for long, especially not when surrounded by dozens of unsupervised food sources and children who hadn't learned to guard their belongings yet. Lunchtime at school revealed the true extent of my condition when other kids started noticing their snacks disappearing and all eyes turned to me. It started small, a missing granola bar here, half a sandwich there. Emma Martinez was the first to catch me, her hand shooting out to grab my wrist as I reached into her backpack during art class. Her apple juice box was already empty in my other hand, the straw still between my lips when she spun around. The look of confusion and betrayal on her 7-year-old face cut deeper than any adult's disappointment ever could. She didn't understand why I'd taken something that wasn't mine, and honestly, neither did I. Many children with PWS report being bullied for food stealing, something I knew all too well. I became the girl who couldn't be trusted around food, the one whose backpack got searched and whose lunch table became a crime scene investigation. Mrs. Patterson started doing random checks of my belongings while the lunch ladies served my pre-measured portions with careful precision, both treating me with the kind of cautious attention reserved for potential troublemakers. Other kids would clutch their lunch boxes closer when I walked by, their parents having warned them about the strange girl who might take their cookies. During snack time, I'd sit in a designated spot at the front of the room where Mrs. Patterson could watch me directly, isolated from my classmates like I carried some contagious disease. The shame burned hotter than the hunger when teachers started watching me during snack time, their suspicious glances making me feel like a predator among my peers. I could feel their eyes tracking my every movement, waiting for me to slip up and reveal the monster they all suspected was lurking beneath my shy exterior. Even Mr. Johnson, the gym teacher, would position himself between me and the water fountain after running laps, worried I might somehow find food in the hallway. I learned to eat with my head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might see the desperate hunger I couldn't hide. I tried to explain the compulsion, the way my brain screamed for food even when my stomach was full, but how do you make a 7-year-old understand a medical condition that most adults couldn't grasp? When Tommy Chen asked me why I ate his birthday cupcake after I'd already had my own, I attempted to describe the feeling inside my head, like a voice that wasn't mine demanding more food no matter what. He stared at me like I was speaking another language, his frosting-stained fingers pointing accusingly at my chocolate-covered mouth. The other kids gathered around us in a circle, their faces a mixture of fascination and disgust as I tried to explain that I wasn't mean or greedy, just sick in a way that made me do things I didn't want to do. Birthday parties became torture sessions where I had to watch other kids eat cake freely while I got a measured slice and constant supervision from hovering adults. The worst was Jessica's pool party, where her mom had clearly been briefed about my condition. She followed me everywhere with worried eyes, positioning herself between me and the snack table like a security guard. When the other kids ran back for seconds and thirds of pizza and ice cream, I sat frozen in my chair with my single slice, watching the abundance around me with the desperation of someone dying of thirst in the middle of an ocean. The social isolation was devastating. Invitations stopped coming, playdates required detailed medical explanations, and sleepovers became impossible due to my dietary needs. I'd overhear other kids planning weekend adventures and birthday parties, their excited chatter fading to whispers when they noticed me listening. My mom had to call other parents before any social gathering, explaining my condition and the special precautions needed, conversations that usually ended with polite excuses and canceled plans. I learned to lie, to hide, to manipulate situations just to get access to food, behaviors that made me hate myself even as I couldn't stop them. I told Mrs. Patterson I felt sick during lunch so I could go to the nurse's office, where I knew she kept a stash of saltine crackers. I volunteered to clean up after class parties, knowing I could quickly consume forgotten crumbs and abandoned treats before anyone noticed. These small deceptions came naturally, my brain calculating opportunities and risks with the efficiency of a seasoned criminal. The worst part wasn't being caught stealing food. It was seeing the fear and disappointment in people's eyes when they realized what I'd done. My condition had made me an outcast before I even understood what friendship meant, teaching me that hunger could steal more than just food. It could steal belonging. But what terrified me most was how easily the lies came, how naturally I slipped into deception, as if something inside me was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Could you hide a monstrous craving behind a forced smile? Let me know in the comments. Living with Prader-Willi Syndrome feels like hosting a split personality. There's the Sarah who wants to be normal, and the Sarah who would do anything for her next meal. If you've ever felt like you were fighting against yourself, you might understand a fraction of what this internal war feels like. But imagine that battle happening every single moment you're awake, with the stakes being your relationships, your health, and your sense of who you really are. The two sides of me were so distinct that I could actually feel the moment when one took control from the other, like a switch flipping in my brain that changed everything about how I saw the world. The internal battle between my rational mind and my compulsive hunger created a psychological war zone that raged inside me every waking moment. Normal Sarah would wake up in the morning with good intentions, planning to follow my meal schedule perfectly and make my parents proud. She'd brush her teeth thinking about homework and friends and all the regular stuff that 10-year-olds worry about. But somewhere between the bathroom and the kitchen, hungry Sarah would take over, scanning every surface for food opportunities, calculating whether my parents were distracted enough for me to grab something extra. The transition was seamless and terrifying, like watching someone else use my hands and my voice to do things I knew were wrong. I could feel myself switching between these two selves, watching in horror as the hungry Sarah took control and made decisions the real Sarah would never make. It was like being a passenger in my own body, screaming at myself to stop, but unable to override the compulsion that drove my actions. Sometimes I feel like two people, the good me and the bad me, as one person with PWS once described it, and that captured exactly what lived inside my head every day. Hungry Sarah was resourceful in ways that amazed and disgusted me. I remember the time she convinced my grandmother that I needed to help her organize her purse, then systematically ate every mint, cough drop, and forgotten candy while chatting sweetly about school. The good Sarah watched in horror, but couldn't stop the hands that kept reaching, the mouth that kept chewing. The good Sarah felt genuine remorse after stealing food, understood the hurt in my family's eyes, and desperately wanted to be the daughter they deserved. She would cry herself to sleep after particularly bad episodes, promising to do better tomorrow and meaning every word of it. She saw the exhaustion on my parents' faces and felt crushing guilt about the locks and restrictions that had taken over our home. This version of me wanted friends and sleepovers and birthday parties where I could eat cake without supervision. She dreamed of being normal, of having conversations that weren't about food or calories or medical appointments. When my little brother looked at me with fear instead of sisterly affection, good Sarah's heart would break into pieces. But the hungry Sarah was primitive, calculating, and utterly ruthless in her pursuit of food, capable of manipulation and deception that shocked even me. This version of me had no conscience when it came to food. She would eat raw meat, pet food, or anything else that could be consumed, completely ignoring taste or safety. She turned me into someone I didn't recognize, someone who would steal from my own grandmother's purse or lie to my best friend's face without hesitation. I'd lie awake at night, making promises to myself about better behavior tomorrow, only to wake up and immediately start planning how to get extra food. The cycle was relentless and heartbreaking, each failure reinforcing my belief that I was fundamentally broken or evil. Normal Sarah would make detailed plans about following the rules perfectly, about earning back my parents' trust, and proving that I could be the good daughter they wanted. But within hours, sometimes minutes, those good intentions would crumble under the weight of the hunger that never stopped demanding attention. The psychological toll was devastating. I began to question which version of myself was real, whether I was inherently bad, or if the syndrome had corrupted my soul. Some nights I'd stare at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to figure out which Sarah was looking back at me. Was I a good person being controlled by a medical condition, or was I fundamentally flawed with brief moments of clarity? The uncertainty ate away at my sense of identity, just as surely as the hunger ate away at my relationships. The hardest part was learning to forgive myself for actions driven by a condition I never chose, while still taking responsibility for the hurt I caused. I thought I was doomed to live this divided existence forever, until someone told me about therapy. But even as I began to understand my condition better, I couldn't ignore how my internal war was destroying everyone around me. My family didn't just live with my Prader-Willi Syndrome. They became prisoners of it, their entire existence revolving around managing my next potential food crisis. If you've ever felt like your problems affected everyone around you, imagine watching your medical condition slowly consume every aspect of your family's daily life. My parents couldn't leave for a date night without calling 3 times to check that the babysitter had properly locked all the cabinets. My siblings couldn't invite friends over without detailed explanations about why certain areas of our house were off limits. Every family decision filtered through the lens of my hunger, transforming normal household activities into carefully orchestrated operations designed to keep me safe from myself. Watching my condition consume not just my life, but my entire family's happiness was perhaps the cruelest aspect of this syndrome. I could see the weight of constant vigilance pressing down on everyone's shoulders, changing the way they moved through our home and interacted with each other. My mother developed this nervous habit of checking locks multiple times throughout the day, her fingers automatically testing cabinet handles, even when she was just walking through the kitchen. My father started working from home more often, not because he wanted the flexibility, but because leaving me with anyone else required extensive briefings and emergency contact lists that made simple childcare feel like a military operation. My siblings grew up in a house where their snacks were locked away, their birthday parties were medical events, and their parents' attention was constantly divided between normal parenting duties and managing my condition. Research shows that siblings of children with PWS often feel neglected, and I could see this playing out in real time with Emma and my brother. My younger sister Emma learned to eat her Halloween candy immediately because leaving it in her room overnight meant finding empty wrappers and a guilty sister by morning. She couldn't understand why she had to hide treats that other kids took for granted, why her backpack needed to be checked before she came home from school, why family movie nights required careful planning around what snacks would be available and how they'd be distributed. I saw the resentment building in my brother's eyes when he couldn't have friends over for sleepovers because of my dietary restrictions and food-seeking behaviors. The final straw came during his 10th birthday party when I was caught in his friend Tyler's backpack, eating the birthday boy's leftover cake that his mom had packed for him to take home. The humiliation on my brother's face as he watched his friends stare at me, frosting smeared across my mouth and guilt written in my eyes, was devastating. After that incident, he stopped asking to have friends over, accepting that his social life would always be limited by his sister's medical condition. Family vacations became exercises in military-level logistics that drained the joy from what should have been relaxing getaways. I'll never forget the look on the hotel clerk's face when my parents requested a room with a lockable mini-fridge and explained that their 11-year-old daughter couldn't be trusted around unsecured food. The confusion, then pity, then uncomfortable understanding that crossed his features captured perfectly how the outside world saw our family's reality. Every vacation began with my parents spending the first hour securing our space, testing locks, and briefing hotel staff about potential midnight raids. My parents' marriage strained under the constant vigilance required, their rare attempts at date nights sabotaged by anxiety and frequent check-in calls. I remember hiding at the top of the stairs, listening to them argue in hushed voices about whose turn it was to get up and check the kitchen locks, whose fault it was that I'd managed to bypass the latest security measure, and how long they could continue living like this. They never fought about normal couple things like money or housework. Every disagreement traced back to the exhaustion of managing my condition 24 hours a day. Finding a babysitter willing and capable of handling my dietary restrictions was nearly impossible, and the few times they tried, they spent the entire evening worrying instead of reconnecting. The financial burden was crushing, extending far beyond typical childhood expenses into specialized foods, endless therapy sessions, and the constant replacement of locks I'd learned to bypass. My parents kept a running tab at the hardware store, regularly purchasing more sophisticated locking mechanisms as I developed increasingly creative ways to access restricted areas. I overheard my parents discussing second mortgages and borrowed money from grandparents, their voices tight with stress as they calculated the cost of keeping me healthy. I watched my mother cry when she had to explain to relatives why I couldn't attend family gatherings where food was freely available and unsupervised. The conversation with my aunt about Thanksgiving dinner was particularly painful, my mom's voice breaking as she described the impossibility of bringing me to a traditional holiday meal where food would be everywhere and my behavior might disturb other guests. These phone calls always ended with my mother apologizing, as if my medical condition was somehow her fault. The guilt of knowing my condition had stolen my family's normalcy was sometimes more painful than the physical hunger itself. Their love built walls and saved me, yet those walls almost broke us all. But as I got older, I discovered that the real danger wasn't just what my condition did to my family, it was what I was becoming in my desperate attempts to hide from the world just how broken I really was. By age 15, I had become an expert at hiding the true extent of my food obsession, but the secrets I kept were slowly destroying what remained of my relationships. If you've ever felt like you were living a double life, imagine that feeling amplified by 1,000, where every interaction requires careful calculation and every conversation becomes a potential minefield. The teenager sitting across from you in chemistry class, laughing at inside jokes and complaining about pop quizzes, isn't the same person who spent last night methodically eating toothpaste because the hunger wouldn't stop. I had mastered the art of compartmentalization, creating separate versions of myself for different audiences, but the walls between these identities were starting to crumble. Living with PWS means becoming a master manipulator, not by choice but by necessity, as the hunger drives me to increasingly desperate measures that would shock the people who think they know me. I had learned to read facial expressions, like a detective, identifying the exact moment when someone's guard drops and their attention shifts away from their food. My brain automatically cataloged information about everyone around me, who brings lunch versus who buys cafeteria food, which teachers eat at their desks, which classmates are generous with sharing, and which ones are protective of their snacks. These observations happened without conscious thought. Like my mind had developed a secondary operating system dedicated entirely to food acquisition opportunities. The elaborate lies I told to cover my food-seeking behaviors had created a web of deception that threatened to collapse at any moment, each fabrication requiring 3 more lies to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I told my mom I ate lunch at school when I actually traded my sandwich to Marcus for his entire pack of cookies, then spent the afternoon in the nurse's office claiming stomach problems so I could access her emergency crackers. I told my friends I wasn't hungry when we hung out after school, all while mentally cataloging every snack visible in their kitchen and calculating how I might access them without being noticed. The mental energy required to track these overlapping stories was exhausting, like maintaining a complex filing system where one misfiled document could bring everything crashing down. I had learned to time my bathroom breaks during family dinners to sneak extra food and perfected the art of hiding wrappers in my jacket pockets, evidence of crimes I had committed throughout the day. The bathroom excuse worked because it was believable and gave me access to the kitchen on my way back, allowing me to grab handfuls of whatever I could find and stuff them into my mouth before returning to the table. I had become an expert at eating silently and quickly, chewing with minimal jaw movement to avoid detection, and I had learned which public restrooms had the best disposal systems for destroying evidence. The shame spirals were devastating. Each successful food theft, followed by crushing guilt, promises to do better, and then the inevitable repetition of the cycle that made me question whether I was fundamentally broken as a human being. The moment after I finished eating stolen food, the satisfaction disappeared and got replaced by a crushing wave of self-hatred that felt like it might suffocate me. I made elaborate promises to myself about being better tomorrow, about finally having enough willpower to resist the urges, but these resolutions never survived the next hunger wave. The cycle had become so predictable that I sometimes felt like I was watching myself from outside my body, knowing exactly what was about to happen but powerless to stop it. My relationship with my boyfriend became another casualty when I was caught eating his lunch during a school trip. Jake's face when he discovered the empty bag was a mixture of confusion, hurt, and something that looked like fear, as if he suddenly understood that the girl he'd been dating was capable of betrayal in ways he'd never imagined. The relationship ended within a week, another connection severed by my inability to control the monster inside me. Social media became torture as I watched peers post pictures of casual meals, spontaneous ice cream dates, and food adventures I could never safely participate in without constant supervision and careful planning. Instagram stories filled with group dinners at restaurants, late-night pizza runs, and friends sharing desserts felt like glimpses into a parallel universe where food was pleasure instead of warfare. I'd scroll through these images with a combination of envy and grief, mourning the normal teenage experiences that my condition had stolen from me. The constant mental energy required to manage my condition, maintain my lies, and appear normal was exhausting in ways that healthy people could never understand, leaving me drained and disconnected from everything else that was supposed to matter in my teenage years. I realized I was losing myself in the performance of being normal, becoming someone I didn't recognize in my desperate attempts to hide my true nature. The weight of these secrets was becoming heavier than the physical weight I constantly battled, threatening to crush what remained of my authentic self beneath layers of deception and shame. If you're gripping your screen, wondering how much further I could fall, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come. But what I discovered next changed everything I thought I knew about my condition and my future. The Prader-Willi Syndrome Association became my lifeline when I discovered their support community online, connecting me with families who understood the daily battles I'd been fighting alone. Despite everything I've shared, I want you to know that living with Prader-Willi Syndrome hasn't destroyed my capacity for joy, hope, or genuine human connection. Through years of therapy, family support, and my own determination, I've learned that this condition doesn't define my entire existence or limit my potential for happiness. Therapy helped me understand my biology, that missing satiety signal in my hypothalamus, and somehow knowing the science behind my hunger made it feel less like a personal failure and more like a medical reality I could learn to manage. There are good days when the hunger feels manageable, when I can focus on school, friendships, and dreams that extend far beyond my next meal. I've found strength in sharing strategies with other PWS families, reminding each other that we're more than our medical conditions. While I'll never be free from this hunger, I've learned that freedom isn't about the absence of struggle. It's about finding meaning despite the challenges. I'm still hungry, but now I hunger for more than just food. I hunger for freedom.